Watching D. Rose hoist the MVP trophy as the youngest MVP ever was legendary, and watching Russell Westbrook pull off what was supposed to be an impossible feat made him a lock for the MVP award. But fast forward to today, and these guys are written off as narrative-driven participation awards. The NBA MVP has undergone a complete flip in public perception as a once highly regarded and highly respected award. So, let's take a look at some of the most controversial selections in NBA history and figure out if this really is a Mickey Mouse award. Now, I mean, we have to point fingers at the guy who has been bullied for this forever. Steve Nash put together one of the weakest MVP campaigns in history at 15.5 points and 11.5 assists per game. In a tight second place finish, Shaq put up 23 points per game with 10.4 rebounds. To this day, Shaq still holds a grudge on Steve Nash for robbing him of the MVP award that he earned fair and square, after he clearly was blackballed from the award, right? Well, in reality, this isn't even close to the case. While 15 and 11.5 surely doesn't pop out as an MVP stat line, especially with the pace of today's NBA game, Steve Nash really did deserve the 2005 award. Now, this race really was just between these two guys who actually were in quite similar positions in their career at the moment. Shaq had just eased from the Lakers, landing in his new home in Miami, while Nash had just left Dallas to rejoin the Phoenix Suns. To start with Shaq, in Miami, he was still a star or a superstar during his time with the Heat, but it certainly began to regress from his peak on the Lakers, where Steve Nash wouldn't have been in the same ballpark at any point in his career. Shaq joined a Heat squad that had won 42 games, then increased 17 after the addition of the Diesel to an impressive 59, as Shaq dropped 23 a night on 59% true shooting. Now, Nash, on the other hand, joined a brutal 29-win Suns squad with the 21st ranked offense and flipped the script entirely to a 62-20 one-seeded finish with the single best offense in the entire NBA. At 15 points, it may seem unproductive, and really any box score watcher really wouldn't like Nash's game entirely, but with 11 assists per night, while being a hyper-efficient scorer at 60.6% true shooting, in terms of value, it's hard to deny Steve earned this one outright because he completely transformed Phoenix from below average to the best team in the Western Conference. I mean, with Nash in the lineup, the Suns won 60 games. In his absence, this team went 2-5. They needed their leader at all times, even if he was only giving them 15 points a night. Now, the 2006 MVP is where this thing gets murkier. Beating out an older Shaq for the 2005 trophy was more justifiable, given that the year was a bit weaker in terms of individual standouts. But 2006 had a few guys going nuclear. Steve Nash actually won this award by a much wider margin, as he improved his production to 18.8 points and 10.5 assists on 51, 44, and 92% shooting splits. The improved stats MVP effect is a real thing that does kind of negate some voter fatigue, and while putting up incredibly efficient stats, the main draw to Nash's MVP campaign is that despite losing Amari Stoudemire, the Suns finished with a solid 54 wins this season. Really, this was a better version of Steve Nash despite losing the role man whose gravity rolling to the basket was such a vital part of the Suns' offense. Now, LeBron actually came in second for voting totals, even though Kobe Bryant earned more first place votes. This is one of the more controversial selections despite Nash's landslide win, and there's quite a bit of reasoning for each of the top four to have earned the award. LeBron did have an incredible year as the Cavs were pretty brutal, and the statistical dominance at 31-7 and 6.6 is certainly MVP caliber, as he dragged them to a 50-win season. Dirk Nowitzki was the best player by far in a Mavs squad that was pretty average at best and led the team to a 60-22 record while averaging 27 points per game with 9 rebounds to pair. And finally, Kobe Bean Bryant had one of the most iconic seasons of his career in his absolute prime, leading the Lakers to a 45-37 record while averaging 35 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game, while the Lakers were one of the worst teams of all time. Due to the talent being so ridiculous this season, it's easy to justify why this year is so much more controversial, but in reality, there's no way to really discredit Steve Nash here. All in all, he was a much better player from his already MVP-worthy season on all-time high efficiency, on a Suns team that would have been all-time bad in his absence. Steve Nash was able to turn a 23-win team a couple years ago who had then lost Quentin Richardson, Joe Johnson, and Amari Stoudemire into the second-best offense in the NBA, and was 2 games away from dragging their sorry asses to the NBA Finals. I mean, I think that deferring to teammates heavily hurt his stock here in public perception, and although this race is closer than 2005, In my opinion, to call this one a robbery is not taking into account the whole picture. If you value the sheer scoring presence of Kobe Bryant going absolutely berserk in one of his best years, fair. Will LeBron James and his dominance dragging the Cavaliers towards the middle of the conference more than Steve Nash, that's okay too. But Steve Nash was scoring or assisting on well over 50% of the team's total points, while dragging a group of guys to the second best offense in the NBA in his own unique way, and may have impacted the game more than just a glance at the stat sheet can tell you. Nash, although controversial, was nowhere close to the worst MVP of all time, and had at the bare minimum a very solid case for the award even if you don't agree with the selection. It's hard to put him amongst the worst MVPs of all time because trust me, it gets way worse than Steve Nash. To give you a quick history lesson, players actually voted for the MVP award from 1955 until 1981, when journalists became the official voters. Now, journalists aren't always perfect at picking the right recipient, and players get a better idea of who's in the league than anyone. But that's not to say that they always got it right, because they certainly made a few head-scratching choices. Now, honestly, when talking about the worst MVPs ever, all of them are going to be in like the 50s or 60s, but none of us give two shits about Bob Cousy, but we can certainly highlight some of those that are less deserving. And Dave Cowens has a case for the worst of all time. Now, the 1973 MVP award was mostly a race between three guys, topped off by the guy you probably know the least about. Hell, out of the top 10, I feel like I know a bit more about almost all of these guys. And that's because Dave Cowens was not exactly MVP caliber when he won his first and only MVP award in 1973. The race was between three dudes who finished in a pretty tight vote, including Dave Cowens at 1, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at 2, and Tiny Archibald at 3, who had a career year. Now, first let's just put their stats next to each other. Dave Cowens at 20.5 points, 16 rebounds, and 4 assists on a shaky 45% from the field was something, I guess. I mean, 16 rebounds is nothing to sneeze at, that's an assload of rebounds, but Kareem did the same thing with 30 points per game, shooting 10% higher from the field. Well, 4th place Wilt Chamberlain grabbed more boards, shooting 70% from the field. Spencer Haywood put up 29 and 13, Nate Thurmond put up 17 and 17 while being a much better defender than Cowens ever was. The stats on paper did not do a great job justifying his season. But hey, neither did Nash, and there was a much better case for his award the deeper you dig, so let's keep going. At 3rd in MVP voting, Tiny Archibald averaged a ridiculous 34 and 11.4 a game on 48% from the field and 85% from the charity stripe. This is a good time to mention that steals and blocks weren't tracked until the following season, but I don't think that's really helping Dave's case either. Now, what clearly caused a massive rift between Tiny Archibald's voting numbers and the MVP and Dave Cowens is Tiny Archibald's Kings were very poor 36 and 46, while Cowens' Celtics, as you probably guessed, had an incredible record at 68 and 14. Due to the Kings' poor record, writing Archibald off for MVP this season kinda does make sense. But as Kareem led his Bucks to a 60 and 22 record, you can't exactly say the same for him. The best players on the best few teams are going to win the award. That's basically how it's chosen. But when taking a look at Kareem and Cowens' teams, it's clear that Kareem's impact on the roster was more valuable than Cowens'. In fact, there was a lot of people more valuable than Cowens'. Kareem willed his team to 60 wins, as the leading scorer by a mile, far more efficient than anyone else on the team while cleaning up the glass and throwing an impressive 5 assists per game. Cowens, on the other hand, was outscored by his teammate John Havlicek, who put up 24 a game more efficiently with 7 boards and 6.6 assists. I mean, Cowens clearly wasn't the most valuable player in the league this season, and I don't even think he was the most valuable player on his own team this season. Havlicek was a first-team All-NBA player this year, while Cowens, despite winning the MVP, only made the second team. I mean, I've never seen this in my life. Out of all the years, this has to be one of the biggest slip-ups. Not only was Cowens not the most valuable player this year, but you could really argue that he was somewhere close to that 5th to maybe 10th range. This one's pretty obvious from a surface level, and the further you dig into it, it becomes more and more obvious. Not only was this a pretty underwhelming MVP season, but Cowens really didn't deserve to win, as he was never in his career an MVP caliber player. But even some of the greatest of all time have snagged an award that likely went into the wrong hands. Magic Johnson is no doubt one of the greatest players to ever live, and no MVP trophy could change that. But that doesn't mean that his 3 MVP awards weren't a bit controversial. Magic was always near the top for MVP voting, but didn't land his first trophy until his age 27 season in 1987. Now, this was a pretty Magic Johnson-esque season, with 24, 12, and 6, while the Lakers finished 65 and 17. Magic was certainly an MVP caliber player. I mean, I don't need to tell you that Magic in his prime was pretty good at basketball. But what makes his selection controversial was that Michael Jordan had his highest scoring season of his entire career, putting up a ridiculous 37 points per game this year. At this time, it's pretty likely that Jordan was already the best player on the planet, but the glaring hole in Jordan's MVP campaign this season was that the Bulls finished just 40-42, while MJ had a rather inefficient season as their ass-cheeks roster did inflate his stats a bit. I mean, 37 points per game is near impossible without a little shot chucking, and for that reason, being the best player on the best team while being as valuable of a creator as it gets rightfully earned Magic his first MVP, which the landslide voting numbers surely back. But once you get to his second trophy, this thing gets way tighter. Magic's 1989 campaign was again very Magic-like. I mean, he's one of the most consistent players of all time. At 22.5 points, 13 assists, and 8 boards, it was pretty close to the best regular season campaign we ever got from Magic Johnson. But if Jordan may have been the best player by 1997, he no doubt was the best player in the world by 1989. 32.5 points on a very high for a guard, 54% from the field, with 8 rebounds and 8 assists. Holy shit, man. This is the most complete stat line we ever got from Michael Jordan. I mean, Magic Johnson was great, but Michael Jordan was on another planet as the best rebounding guard in the game, best passing 2 guard in the game, the best defending guard in the game at 3 steals a game, and the best scorer in the world by a country mile. Jordan was the best player in 1989. Honestly, this is a case for one of the best individual seasons ever played, but the reason he lost this MVP is pretty obvious. As the Bulls finished as the 6th seed with 47 wins, this just wasn't quite high enough to secure the trophy, when Magic's Lakers snagged the 1st seed with a 57-win season. Now, in 1989, I'm giving this one to Mike, but in 1990, Magic's 3rd and final MVP trophy is by far one of the most controversial in basketball history. If you are ever doubting 1990s basketball, check out this MVP race because holy shit, this year was incredible. Karl Malone put up 31 and 11 and didn't even crack the top 3. Now, this top 3 was extremely close with MJ, Magic, and Barkley all finishing within 70 points of each other. But what makes this one easily Magic's most controversial MVP is that he won this award while actually coming in 2nd place for first place votes. Magic at this point was probably at the tail end of his prime, which means pretty little given how consistent he was when at his best. And outside of a slight dip in efficiency, was close to a prime Magic. And of course, the Lakers finished atop the Western Conference, but with Jordan's Bulls and Barkley's Sixers finishing 1st and 2nd in the East respectively, you really can't appoint Magic's team record for this one. Now, Jordan went absolutely nuclear as you can expect, at just under 34 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists on 53% from the field and 38% from 3, with 3 steals a night on the 1-seeded Bulls. I mean, honestly, again, Magic Johnson had a great season, but Jordan was putting together the greatest basketball ever played. He was in another tier compared to even Magic Johnson. Now, Jordan was Jordan this year, but believe it or not, Jordan wasn't even the one getting snubbed for the award, as Charles Barkley was the leading first-place vote getter, averaging 25, 11, and 4 on 60% shooting from the field. Barkley dragging this sorry Sixers team to the 2 seed was fucking incredible, man. And although we all like to laugh with him and at him now, don't get it confused. Charles Barkley at his peak was better than a lot of players that are supposed to be above him all time. Now, Barkley is bitter as shit about this robbery to this day. There's conspiracies revolving around his lack of 2nd and 3rd place votes stemming from the general disliking of his character more than his on-court play, which I can't exactly prove or disprove. But regardless, given how ridiculously bad the Sixers were and how dominant Charles Barkley was this season, there's definitely reason to believe that Magic may have snagged a couple too many MVP awards during his day. But really, 1 MVP or 3, it really didn't define Magic's legacy too much. But Russell Westbrook, on the other hand, is a much different case. Russell Westbrook, according to a hell of a lot of people, slots in as one of the worst MVPs in history, with a legacy that was defined by his award, that was earned from a feat that is no longer impressive, before crashing and burning from the top to finish his career worse than any superstar in history. Yeah, people really fucking hate this guy. And although much of it is extreme, there's a much more level-headed argument to be made against his game. Russell Westbrook's award is often looked at as overly narrative-based, with a triple-double average that is much less ridiculous than just a few years ago. While nothing in his game screamed longevity whatsoever, and after his prime, his usefulness took a steep decline. Now, as the years have gone by, it really feels like the basketball world has lost touch of what was really going on this year. So, let me quickly recap. After Russ and the Thunder were backstabbed by KD, who went to the Golden State Warriors, the Thunder were immediately mocked to be a fringe payoff team, maybe to even out of the playoffs entirely. Now, this was mostly a 3-man race throughout most of the year. Kawhi Leonard was generally thought of as the number 3 guy, who just didn't have the statistical impact. I mean, Kawhi's case for the MVP this year is actually pretty underrated, but nonetheless, it really was kind of just a 2-man race. Now, James Harden and the Rockets were coming off a 41-41 season and had just lost Dwight Howard. Now, this is where the narrative this season tends to get a bit lost. The Houston Rockets weren't mocked to be this clear contender as it gets written up as now. The Houston Rockets were expected to be ass, just sliding in Clint Capella for Dwight Howard. On two relatively underwhelming teams, there was no other star players on the Rockets or the Thunder this season. James Harden and Russell Westbrook went head-to-head in the battle of historically high usage rate carry jobs. Both teams finished quite above expected, and by quite a wide margin too. The Thunder finishing with 47 wins was quite the season for them, and the Rockets, in James Harden's favor, finished incredibly well with 55 wins compared to where we expected. When comparing the two stats for the season, really the production between each other isn't too far off. Russell with a 31-point triple-double, and Harden at 29, 8, and 11. These are really two similar seasons, honestly. However, when you compare the quite large differential from Russell Westbrook's 55% true shooting and James Harden's 62%, it appears with a better team record, more efficient scoring, similar averages, and even a 4-1 first-round win over the Thunder in the first round, this really was Harden's year to win. Now, some of the criticisms that Russell Westbrook's received over this award are valid. Being the good guy after KD left while accomplishing a triple-double average when thought to be impossible created the perfect narrative to form an NBA MVP season. And yeah, sure it was a good story, but having lived through that 2017 season, something about this just seems off. Well, that's because Russell Westbrook's 2017 campaign was about 4 more than KD in triple-doubles. Everything about Russell Westbrook's season screamed value. So let's take a look at the first-round matchup between the MVP and, according to most, the man who was robbed. Throughout a 5-game series, Oklahoma outscored Houston by 2.7 points per 100 possessions with Westbrook on the floor. It was outscored by 60 fucking points per 100 in the 46 minutes that Russ was off. Cleaning the glass, which filters out garbage time minutes, actually has him at a 76.1 plus-minus differential, so those numbers may be understated. Russell Westbrook's 2017 carry job was easily the closest thing we've seen to Allen Iverson's 2001 carry job, with a rotation consisting of Victor Oladipo, who was far from his prime, Sabonis, who was just a baby scoring 6 a game, Steven Adams, who was his second-best player, Enes Kanter, and Andre Roberson. This was a defensive-minded team with bad spacing. All in all, this is just a bad team. And worse than that, this is just a terrible team to surround around Russell Westbrook. Taking out Kevin Durant, who has as much outward gravity as anyone not named Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, and Serge Ibaka, who provided some spacing for Sabonis and an unproven Oladipo, created the biggest logjam of an offense I've seen in my lifetime. But regardless, Russell Westbrook turned it up to another level this season and found ways to produce to ridiculously high volume throughout it. Russ may not have been the most efficient player in the league, but as the statistics indicate, he was just as superhuman as you remember. With a league-leading PER of 30.6, a league-leading offensive box plus-minus of 8.7, and a league-leading 11.1 BPM, and a league-leading 9.3 value over replacement player, with a 13.4 on-off differential compared to James Harden's 2.8, the deeper you dig, it just makes it so much harder to write off the Brody this year. James Harden fit into the Mike D'Antoni offense even better than Steve Nash, debatably. But really, with shooters surrounding him at all times, this Rockets team, although not overly talented, was perfectly suited to allow an isolation-heavy playmaker guard to go berserk. No shit they won more games while James Harden played at a higher efficiency, but in terms of who legitimately brought more value to their team, Russell Westbrook took a much worse squad to 47 wins while statistically having the most impactful time on the floor, leading the league in scoring in the fourth quarter while steadily improving his scoring efficiency throughout the game, and garnering MVP chance in every arena he went in for an entire season. Westbrook's MVP season wasn't just about his revenge year after an ugly bromance breakup, or stat-padded triple-doubles. And it shouldn't really take a nerd on the internet to remind you that when Westbrook was at his best, he was one of the most fantastic players that the game has ever seen. Now, Russell Westbrook at the very least had a very strong case for this award, even if you disagree that he was the rightful holder. But Karl Malone may be a different story. Now, all of us hate this dude, so it's probably going to be pretty easy to convince everyone watching this that this was a Mickey Mouse MVP, But Karl Malone won a pair of awards that to this day are pretty controversial. So let's find out if he really stole these, or people just like dunking on him because he's a shit stain. So Karl usually ranked pretty high when it came to MVP voting, but took quite a while for him to actually get one until his age 33 season in 1997. Malone averaged 27.4 points, 10 rebounds, and 4.5 assists a game on 55% from the field. Now, I'm just noticing this now, for how athletic Malone was, how the hell did this dude put up half a block a game in his prime? That's kind of crazy. But nonetheless, this seems like your run-of-the-mill MVP season at 64-18. Now, where again this gets controversial is that Jordan had just put up 29.6 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists on 56% true shooting, compared to Malone's 60, while the Bulls won 69 games. I don't think we really have to dig too far into this one. MJ had won 4 MVPs at this time and was coming off his first MVP season after his retirement, so the buzz had kind of settled back down. Another thing to note is that with the Bulls declining from their record-breaking 72-win season, and Jordan's stats slightly declining a bit, the real voter fatigue kicks in when a former MVP is on the decline, or at the very least isn't improving. Voters, just like the rest of us, are human and typically recognize a player accelerating more than consistently staying at the top. I mean, LeBron hasn't won an MVP for 12 years. And I know it's been a while since LeBron was the best player in the world, but it for damn sure hasn't been 12 years. Jordan was better than Malone as a top 5 defender in the NBA, with a better record than Malone, and being a better scorer while Malone's whole game was revolving around his scoring ability. Jordan got robbed here, and that's pretty easy to see. This wasn't Malone's only award that he fleeced. In his age 35 season, Malone took home the award with one of the weaker stat lines at 23.8 points and 9 rebounds in the lockout-shortened season. I mean, this was pretty good stat lines, but for a declining player on a pretty good but not elite team, to snag the award over Alonzo Mourning, who had similar totals with an extra 3.5 blocks per game, was pretty wild. This year was generally just a bad year for regular season basketball due to the lockout, but Tim Duncan, Shaq, and Alonzo, like I mentioned, all finished with totals that were just better than Malone. I'm sure it doesn't pain any of us to know that Malone really shouldn't be the holder of any MVP awards, but let's go through a couple of seasons in recent memory to find if any of the recent chatter is worth a damn. Now, Gilbert Arenas had recently stated that Nikola Jokic is the worst MVP in the last 40 years. Jokic is a 3-time MVP at this point, each of which he led the league in PER, win shares, box plus minus, and value over replacement. All of which just gets better every year. I mean, even the MVP that Joel Embiid won in 2023 was a toss-up that very likely could have gone the other way. Nikola Jokic is currently the all-time leader in PER, win shares per 48, box plus minus, and offensive box plus minus. For Christ's sake, this is one of the worst takes I've ever heard in my life. Jokic was easily deserving of each MVP. I mean, even the fans have some wicked voter fatigue. While Joker's shooting 50% from 3, while the Nuggets have an all-time great offense with him on the floor, and an all-time bad offense with him off of it, leading the league in every advanced metric other than defensive win shares, and is probably going to miss out on the trophy for winning too many already. Gil's take was absolutely trash, but nonetheless, the rage bait was successful since we're still here talking about it, so let's move on. Now, the Derrick Rose argument might be one that hits home for the most people. In 2011, LeBron was fresh off the decision, and Dwight being Dwight Howard were two of the most disliked figures that were not given the award, while hometown boy took the reins as the youngest MVP in league history. The season was special. I don't think anyone wants to argue that, but what many contrarians are saying now is that Rose robbed LeBron and took away a potential 5-peat, while putting together one of the worst MVP campaigns in history. The context of that season is crucial to understand why Rose was the clear choice. The Bulls finished with the best record in the league at 62-20, even though their second and third best players in Boozer and Noah missed significant time due to injury. Rose carried the load for a team missing 2 of its most important pieces, elevating them to elite status in the process. Offensively, Rose was the heart and soul of the team. With him on the court, the Bulls had an offensive rating of 110.9, which ranked among the top 10 teams that year. When Rose was off the floor, however, their offensive rating plummeted to 101.2, which would make them the worst offense in the entire league. The Bulls' offensive success was entirely dependent on Rose's ability to create and score. His impact extended beyond scoring, as he was the only player in the league that season to rank in the top 10 in both points and assists per game, all while playing at a low pace at 23rd in the league. His advanced stats were also strong across the board, 2nd in value over replacement, 3rd in BPM, 1st in offensive BPM, and 5th in win shares, all of which cemented his place as an MVP candidate. The MVP race wasn't even close, as Rose earned 113 of 121 first-place votes. For context, the other 2 main candidates, and LeBron and Dwight, didn't match Rose's combination of individual brilliance and team success despite having better teams, to way the fuck better teams. LeBron had an excellent season, but played on a Heat team with 2 other prime stars and a deep supporting cast, yet still finished with the worst record in the East. His individual averages were superior in some metrics, but those advantages didn't translate to better team results. The Bulls also swept the Heat 3-0 in the regular season, underscoring Rose's superiority in head-to-head matchups. As for Dwight Howard, his Magic team won 10 fewer games than the Bulls despite having a supporting cast that was on par with the teams that made a deep playoff run in 2009 and 2010. Ultimately, when you consider the Bulls' league best record, his offensive dominance, and his advanced stats, it becomes clear that Rose was the most deserving candidate. Discrediting his historic achievement as the youngest MVP in NBA history ignores the context and narrative of that season. Rose didn't just win the award, he earned it. Now, I hope you learned something about the MVP award today. It's kinda silly to put stock in such a kinda silly, kinda not accolade, but at the end of the day, this is just a fun thing that the NBA puts together so we can argue about it for years to come. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, trying to hit 100,000 by the end of the year, and I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.